Amen, amen, amen. Lux Digital Church, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. Once again, my name is Mark, and I'm the lead pastor here of Lux Digital Church. And thank you so much for Chino Mage, who's willing to jump in and share and be able to pray for us. Messiah Aaron, I did see you here for the very first time. I want to welcome you here to our community. It's a joy and a pleasure to have you here with us. This is an entirely online church, and so it doesn't matter what you believe or where you come from or what your background is. You're welcome here, and we're glad to have you here. We're a digital church that exists inside of the Twitch and Discord communities and a place of spiritual guidance and hope. We're glad that you're here. The name Lux, L-U-X, Digital Church, Lux is the Latin word for light, and so the name of our church came out of a source of hope and a light for an otherwise dark place in the world. And our heart and our belief is that light and hope is through Jesus. So I'm glad that you're here. We're so thankful for you. And church family, if you would, just welcome Messiah Aaron in. We're so glad. Much love and respect to you all. We're so glad to have you here with us. Thank you for joining us. If you have any other questions, we do a post-service experience, and that's a time when you can jump in and ask real questions about what's going on. But tonight, guys, we are in part 4 of our Strong series, where we have been diving in and talking about 3 different subjects around mental health. In week 1, we talked about anxiety, and then we had a professional counselor who came on to talk to us about anxiety and do a live Q&A. Last week, I talked about addiction and shared some of the stuff from my own life. In this week, we have someone who specializes specifically in gambling and sex addiction, who's going to be here live on the stream with us and answering your questions and some of the questions that I have as well. It's going to be a live conversation that's going to be happening right here. First off, Lennon, Liberty University, bro, that's not that far from me. Feeling welcome to Loving the Vibe. So glad to have you here, Messiah Aaron. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's Latin. That's why I wrote LVX. It's actually the reason I clicked on the stream. Well, we're so glad to have you here with us. Once again, we believe that we have an opportunity to be a light in a really dark place in the world. So without any further conversation, because I don't want to take up too much of our time, because I think this is an important and pivotal conversation, I want to invite in and welcome Brady. Brady, thank you so much for coming live on the stream. Welcome in, my friend. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you tonight? Let me get in the shot here.
You're in the shot. You're kind of cut off, but whenever we change it, oh, look at that. We have the ability to change it. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Brady. It's really it's meaningful to me having you here because of our history and experience together. And I just want to let you know that I appreciate your willingness after a long day to come on at 9 p.m. and hang out with us.
No, I'm happy to be here. Honored to be here. Love to share any information I have, and hopefully help some people. That would be my goal in coming on, and of course answering any questions you all might have, and do my best to provide clinical and hopefully some spiritual content and answers on the subject of addiction.
Awesome. And guys, if you're here new tonight, I did share last week that I have personally been meeting with Brady, dealing with my own addiction issues for the last couple of years. Just one of the reasons I asked him to come on, because there's been so many aha moments over the last couple of years that I've had while meeting with Brady. So we're going to ask a couple of questions during the open conversation, and then we'll have like a live Q&A time in a little bit from over on the couch, Brady. But for now, let me ask the first question. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into what you're doing in the mental health field, just so we can kind of get an idea in the background for what's going on?
Yeah, that's a big question. I don't know how much time I have to explain that, but I did not want to be I did not want to be a therapist growing up. It wasn't my dream. It wasn't my passion. I had no desire. I didn't even know what psychology meant. So when I got the so-called call in my life, I actually had to look it up. I was like, what is all this? I knew it was a class in college, but never really pursued it. I was a musician, and I was a freelance musician around the Pittsburgh area. Did some cool things, toured the country, playing guitar, and then became a worship leader at a couple different churches. And one day,
which people in our chat can tell, by the way, because we've already had comments about how cool your hair is in the chat. We have about 60 people in chat. One of the first comments was Brady with the cool hair. It was like one of the first ones that we had, which I don't disagree. I think you have awesome hair. So,
thank you. So yeah, I'm still a musician. I still love music, and obviously you can always check me online. on YouTube and watch the videos and all that fun stuff. So a little plug there, um, but I remember well, there's a couple reasons why I got into counseling. After a failed marriage in my late 20s, I I was like, I'm not sure what happened there, and I did a lot of reflection, and I wanted to, I love the institution of marriage, and I wanted to figure out what happened. So now that didn't lead me down the path to go to like 6 years of schooling, but it was the start of it, and I felt God calling me. He's like, I want you to, go down this path, help others, and in the very initial stages, it was all focused towards relationships. But as we know, relationships, the problems with relationships isn't always just the relationship; it's everything in the relationship. And when you're learning therapy and learning how to counsel and everything, you really have to dive into all the mental illnesses and addiction and all that other stuff. So I got schooled real fast on all that. And my first job out of grad school was there's not too many jobs once you get out of school. As a
Sure.
beginning therapist, no one wants to listen to you. It's like, oh, you just have all the book smarts. So basically, the only places that really hire you are addiction centers because they're in complete need of therapists, and they probably pay, the least. So you have to kind of, as I say, put your time in, do the trench work. And I remember my first day, they said, oh, well, here, we're going to give you this IOP in the addiction side. And I was like, all right, what's IOP? And they're like, intensive outpatient. You're going to be with the same group of people 3 days a week for 3 hours a day. And you're going to help them through addiction. And so I had all walks of life come through. I was so used to people lying to me, people skipping out on me. I had people throwing up in my office because they were through withdrawal. I had to give drug tests. So I was I was not people's favorite person. I've seen people switch out urine. I've seen there's been urine on my desk in like little containers while I'm eating lunch, and I was like, this is not what I signed up for. So, but back in school, which I heard you mention Liberty, that's one of the places I went. There was a guy that came in to one of the classes. His name was Doug Rosenau, and he was the founder of Christian Sex Therapy. And he gave a talk, and he was basically recruiting people. And something spoke to my heart, and I was like, that's what I want to do. It was like, but how cool would that be? I was thinking, it'd be a therapist, and that's kind of like, but to be a sex therapist, now that's cool. So I was like, I want that title, but with sex therapy and everything that I kind of got into also was with sex addiction. And of course the funny thing is, like, people I always hear is like, well, if I was going to be addicted to anything, it'd be sex. And I was like, well, I can tell you some stories. But I don't want to get into too much. I wanted to just, that's kind of a little bit of my pathway in. Like I said, I didn't really want to be a therapist. I wanted to be the next Eddie Van Halen. But that didn't quite work out in my path.
Well, I'm glad that you're a therapist and a musician.
Yeah.
People do want to know where to find you on YouTube. Where do we actually find you on YouTube? Like if we wanted to search for you.
Just Brady Novotny.
Brady Novotny. There you go. We can link it in Discord later as well. So how does addiction interact? And this is a big question. I realize this, and we've had some conversation about this. But how does addiction interact with and impact our spiritual lives?
Yeah, let me pull up my notes here. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that, anything in addiction is, automatically sort of like an idol in our lives. And, we really, sort of, it tells us, you need to partake of me, and you kind of, cave into it. And that could be a lot of different things. But, so I look at it as basically an idol. It is the opposites of the fruits of the Spirit. When we have the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Addiction is the antithesis of all that. We're talking about selfish behavior. We're talking about lying. We're talking about cheating. We're talking about not being kind, not being generous, being abusive, and lack of empathy and no self-control. So it's really the opposite of all of the things of the fruit of the Spirit. And there's a reason for that because of, something we'll go into later. But I don't know. Mark, is it okay to tell some stories?
Yeah, if you want to tell a couple of stories, I would love that because, this concept of the connection between the fruit of the Spirit and addiction has been really huge in my life and has opened up doors for freedom that previously had been closed because they just had not occurred to me. So, yeah, feel free to share what you want to share if you'd like to.
Yeah, yeah. There was a lady I was in class with, and in one of my classes, and afterwards we were just talking, and she had a fantastic thesis, and she was like, I can pinpoint every addiction to one of the lack of the fruit of the spirits. And I was like, I want to read your paper, and she's like, no. I was like, oh my
Geez.
gosh, why not? She's like, it's not published yet and all this other stuff. She did all this research, and it was amazing what she had told me. And I was like, there's some truth there, but I never found out exactly. I mean, I would love to get my hands on this paper, but I never really found out exactly what addictions line up with each fruit of the spirit. But as a whole, I mean, I can definitely see how addiction would completely be the opposite of the fruit of the spirit. But some of the stories, as I was in beginning stages of drug and alcohol rehab for people, these people would come in, and I was like, well, tell me about your day, or tell me about what's going on, and they'd say, yeah, I had a relapse, and I've been sober for this many days or this many hours, and and they sometimes look very shaken up, and I'd be like, well, what's wrong? They said, I can't just shake one of the dreams I had, and I was like, okay, well, let's talk about it. Tell me what kind of dream you had. And this one person was very vivid. And he had no spirituality in his life, never opened up a Bible or anything. It sounded like he was like an agnostic. But he basically said, I fell asleep, and, in my dream or whatever, I ended up in hell, for all of the things I have done, with my, addiction, and how I stole from my family and all this stuff. And he's like, I knew exactly what was wrong. I knew exactly why I was there. And he said, and I was being tortured in flames. And he says, and I looked up, and across this great sky, I could see my family on the other side, and I could not get their attention. And I was like, oh my gosh. That's the story of,
Sure, it's
Lazarus.
coming
I mean,
straight from the scriptures. Sure.
it's like, I said, do you know the story? And he's like, what? And I was like, all right, well, this is interesting, so that was one story that kind of, threw me for a loop a little bit. And I was like, wow, there's definitely a spiritual something going on here. And, one of the other ones is a guy that, it comes to sex addiction, he was so involved in his sex addiction, so shameful. And it was so sad. I remember he came in on a Friday, and, we talked about things and everything like that. And then he missed his next appointment, which was like on a Wednesday the following week. And I got a call from his wife, and she says, can I come in? And I was like, sure. And I said, where's, so-and-so? And she said, I have to tell you, early on in the week, he took a gun and blew his head off. He just, and the note said he couldn't take the shame anymore. And I was like, oh my gosh. He's like, and she says, you were one of the last people that he saw. Can you tell me anything? And, in those moments, nothing prepares you for those moments,
Sure.
and just how addiction steals so much. And the other last example, real quick, is was treating a guy for bipolar depression, and very severe. But he also had a pornography addiction. And in one of his manic episodes, he had a heart attack and died. And they were cleaning out his house because he was separated from his wife. His kids were over there cleaning out. They were, probably 16, 17 years old. He had passed away again a few days, after one of our meetings. And I was, again, the last person that he had talked to. And they were going through all his stuff. And one of the things was his computer. And his son, and the family asked me to come over and said, "Hey, can you give us some comfort?" And I was like, "Yeah, confidentiality doesn't really mean much now. I'll tell you whatever you want to know." So I went over their house as a good gesture. And, as I was leaving the house, the 16-year-old ran out and said, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Was my father ever addicted to pornography?" And I said, "Why do you ask?" And he says, "I was going through his computer, and I found just sites upon sites stored, and it's really affected me." And at that moment, I just grabbed his hand and just said, "Hey, your dad struggled through a lot, and I don't want you to remember him like this." So I comforted him as best as I could, but it was a sharp reminder. Uh, you never know what you're going to leave behind. And without so it's always good to get help and try to solve it here rather than later. So yeah, hopefully that's a long answer to your question, but
No, it's a good answer. It's a good answer. And our spiritual lives, not just our spiritual lives, our physical lives, our eternal lives, are all impacted by addiction. And one of the things that you brought up to me was specifically with my addiction, which I shared last week. It's rooted in a lot of the lack of two parts of the fruit of the spirit, right? Love and self-control. And what's been really interesting to me was learning how to strengthen those muscles in other aspects of my life, because I didn't link it to that. Like, I didn't link the midnight bowl of cereal to pornography addiction. I didn't link driving too fast or coasting through a stop sign to a pornography addiction, but I realized that in other aspects of my life, I had lacked self-control. My life was out of control. And if I learned to practice self-control at a stop sign, which I'm still really, really bad at, it would enable me to practice more self-control in the area of my addiction. And so as I've been struggling through recovery and relapse, one of the things that I've learned through my time with you is, what areas of my life am I not loving people well? What areas of my life am I not practicing self-control? How can I bolster and strengthen those areas? Because they will actually aid me. Because addiction, we kind of isolate into one little section of our life. We think it's in a pocket, but it has far-reaching implications. And if you can identify some of the fruit of the spirit that's impacting, sometimes you can bolster those in other aspects of your life. But the next question, Brady, is you and I have spent a ton of time talking about addiction and cognitive theory and the way that impacts the actual brain. Can you share a little bit about how addiction specifically impacts the physiology of our brain and the way that our thoughts work? I know obviously you can't get into a 6-year degree tonight, but if you could share just 10,000 foot, what is actually happening in the physiology of our brain in addiction?
Yeah, I saw that question. It's like, how deep do I go? Two types of there's two types of ways of looking at addiction. One is called process and one is called chemical. And, I can get into both of those, but, both versions, will say activate the brain's reward center with what, this thing called dopamine, which is just like almost like adrenaline. It's like, yes, and over time, as we constantly activate that part, it leads to intense cravings, but also it creates a tolerance. So, that might be, more drinks. For porn, that might be more intense porn, and I mean more, if you know anything about porn, you go to Pornhub, it's like there's, I don't know, million different videos, genres, and all kinds of stuff. And you start, you just want something different. You start curiosity, and all of a sudden you're just waking up and like, well, how did I get here? You know, but it increasingly reduces your willpower to resist over time. So you'd be like, one time you could click on something that was, it's like, whoa, that was extreme. And then you click off of it right away. It's like, I can't go back there. But all of a sudden you'll be thinking about it and you'll be like, maybe I can, and then it just starts this whole cycle and you're in it. And so basically that, it says it increasingly reduces our willpower to resist it. So the prefrontal cortex, which is right up here, this part of the brain is used for our decision making and our empathy towards people. But mainly, decision making. What's our judgment, decision making, and addiction hijacks that. And it really throws a monkey wrench into that. But a process addiction is a behavior repeated to get a desired effect. Substance addiction is the drug, where the drug is the vehicle, meaning, so substance, I have a chemical that I am putting into my body that's altering my state of consciousness. So if I do cocaine, I'm not doing anything to get me high. The drug is doing something to get me high. Alcohol is doing something to get me drunk. Marijuana is doing something to get me high. All of these things, pills, anything, is a substance is a substance is changing my state, altered, my mental state. Now with process addiction, it's a little different. I'm doing a behavior and my body is getting me high. So, I'm not taking anything. You can't go really out into the supermarket or the mall and saying, oh, that guy's addicted to porn. But you could probably see somebody who's addicted to heroin. There's a big difference there. So like gambling, your slots, your betting on sports, all that stuff, you're not ingesting something. Food, food, we have to eat food. But it's also a process addiction because, food doesn't necessarily, alter your state of consciousness so you can't drive, so to speak,
Sure.
but like alcohol. So it's all process addiction. But the thing is, it can be compounded. Whereas if I eat a whole pizza and feel guilt and shame, then I'm going to go drink the beer to get rid of the guilt and shame. So you can have both, and that's obviously a very dangerous place to be. But eventually the individual, doesn't get high, but uses it to avoid getting low. So, that's when we hear the comments, or I hear the comments of like, I'm having trouble getting to sleep at night, and I have a really busy day tomorrow, and I can't do that. So I'm going to watch porn and masturbate. So it gets me to sleep. So that's avoiding the low, That's not like somebody who wants to like, oh man, I can't wait to get home and watch this because, whatever. You're just avoiding the low. And that's, you're in it. You're in it for sure, and then all the natural things that brought us pleasure, such as like spending time with family, working on our hobbies, or just work in general, are now competing with that cycle. So it's just like, well, I don't want to get low like today. It's like people will say, they'll smoke marijuana. I've heard many times. It's like, I such a beautiful day, but you know what I wanted to do to enhance it? I wanted to go smoke, and I was like, huh? And they're like, yeah, and it just enhances it so much. I was like, well, it's because you're not enjoying it in its natural state, so all the things that you would enjoy, spending time with family, I need to go get high first in order to spend time with family. Or I'm doing my hobbies, what I need to, I'm doing video games, let me get high first before I do this, or take this or do that. It's, you can't just enjoy things naturally. You have to have a substance to enjoy it now. So yeah.
Yeah, and some of the things that we've talked about here is how, the brain is lazy, ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
and it wants to run the same track, and as it gets diminishing rewards, it learns to run that further. But eventually, for me, my brain runs the same track because it understands intimacy, it understands it through a lens, it runs that track, it runs that track, it runs that track, and I've had to learn through meeting with you to uproot that, to catch that at surface level thoughts before it goes into the deeper levels of my brain, to make sure I deny those things early on, to be cognitive and aware of what I'm thinking about and when I'm thinking about those things have all been really important steps and pieces into recovery for me. So can you give us, just as a last question, and then we'll do something in post show, can you give us a couple of thoughts, like if we are currently, let's say I'm in the middle of addiction, which so many people in our community actively are, right? They're dealing with either
Mm-hmm.
these process addictions or substance abuse addictions. Can you give a piece of advice as like, what is my first step? And it can be, whatever you think it is, but what is my first step? What's the next thing that I should do if I'm willing to acknowledge that I'm dealing with an addiction and I do not want to continue to deal with it or let it go to where I know it's inevitably headed? How can I begin the process of recovery or stepping away from it?
Hmm. Yeah, the first thing is knowing where you are. Stage of change. There's basically four stages of change. And I'll go through this quickly. Pre-contemplation. That means somebody wants me to change. I really don't want to change. My wife wants me to change, but yeah, I'll do it for her. Or my family wants me to change. I'm not convinced I want to change. Contemplation is, I'm contemplating change. It's like there's probably some good things here. I still like to get high, so whatever drug of choice that is. Determination is when you start to see a little bit more movement. I'm determined to do something. I'm desperate. I want some help. And when you're at that stage, then that's probably the best stage. You see the least amount of relapse. And then they have what they call the action stage, which is when you have significant time of sobriety and you're actually helping people through their stages of change. But as a sort of like a real couple quick things that really help, that I stole from AA is like sort of like the minute rule. It's like, if, one of the things is the addiction has the control, I'm powerless over it. But if I can control and start to build up some self-control. So if, let's just use food, for example, if I eat a cookie and I want a second cookie, and it's sitting there, I'm going to say, I want that, but I am going to wait 5 minutes. I'm going to look at the clock and push it out 5 minutes and say at the end of 5 minutes, I eat that cookie. Well, that's good because I've now started to develop a little bit of self-control. Even if it's 5 minutes worth, it's something. The goal is to push it out, push it out, push it out, push it out, push it out until the actual craving dissipates. So that's a real quick one. Just to know that we all have willpower for about 30 days. That's why gym memberships, they sign people up and they only hang around for about 30 days and then they go somewhere else. Because at the end of 30 days, your willpower runs out and you have a small dose of it, each one of us. So what that means is something else needs to take over for it. Some other motivation. Why are you doing this? It's like, I'm going to do this. This is it. That's it. I'm going to cut this all out. But something else needs to take over because you're giving up a high. You're giving up what you're doing not to be low. And you're like, all right, I'm going to do this. And now you're just like, oh, you have 30 days to figure out what's going to take over. That's important to know. And that's usually had to help with another counselor or something like that. The other thing is we have the top part of the brain, the middle part of the brain, and the bottom part of the brain. The top part of the brain, when a thought comes into your mind about the addiction, you have literally seconds and you can combat it with another thought and it can go away. If you think about it longer, you can combat it with some thoughts, but you're going to have to do an action. You're going to have to get up. You're going to have to go somewhere. You're going to have to call somebody because at that point, you're starting to ruminate on it and it's starting to take root. If you think about it more than like 2 or 3 minutes, it's down in the lower part of the brain and you have to white knuckle it or you were going to relapse. So that's important. The sooner you can deal with it, as soon as the thought enters into your brain, the easier it's going to overcome. and then of course, then identifying what is your drug of choice. There is a difference in sex addiction. It's like everybody says, well, it could be porn, could be the drug of choice, or it could be masturbation, could be the drug of choice. Which one is it? And it's deciding. It's like, well, is it beer or is it hard liquor? Is it, you have to really kind of get in there and decide what is the drug of choice. Is it gambling? Okay, but is it slots? Is it sports betting? Because some people can do slots, but their drug of choice is sports betting. And they can walk away from a slot machine at any point, but they cannot walk away from sports. So, those types of things are just some quick ways to think about recovery. And of course, really meetings.
Of course, yeah. And we talked about this last week. We talked about the 3 C's: confession to God, confession to ourselves, confession to others. We talked about counsel, finding people that can counsel you, who've been there, who've done that. People like I'm meeting with you, you're one of my counsel. And then lastly is community. So finding a group of people that you can live life with, that can hold you accountable and help. So those 3 C's combined with some of this stuff that I just knew you were going to come out with. It's really practical because it's something that I'm working through, which is like, okay, when is my brain triggered? How quickly can I adjust and grab that thought? And can I turn that thought? Because if I don't turn that thought, I know that it's going to work its way into my brain, and it might not come out for 2 days, but it's going to work its way into my brain over time, and I'm not going to be able to get away from it. And there's this feeling of being trapped in addiction that can be very, very real. So thank you, Brady, so much for some of those points.
Absolutely.
When we come back in just a minute, we're going to go to a short 1-minute break, guys. If you are here for the first time, I want to welcome you once again. My name is Mark. I'm the lead pastor here at Lux Digital Church, and this series, we're talking over the course of 6 weeks about anxiety, addiction, and depression. This week is the second part of our conversation about addiction, but next week we're going to be diving in with a conversation about depression. I'm going to be bringing a word. It'll look a lot different than this, and the week after that we're going to have our very own Mackenzie, who's part of our church, is going to be coming on live just like Brady is right now, and we're going to be talking about depression. In a moment, I'm going to be on the couch, and I'm going to be having a conversation live with Brady from there, and we're going to be answering your questions. So if you have questions, now is the time to post them in the chat. In addition, we'll be going over one more question that we didn't get to, which is how do I help someone who I love who's dealing with addiction? How can I help them in that? So thank you so much, Brady. We'll be back in just 1 minute, guys. After this intermission, me and Brady will be on the couch. We're having a conversation. You can post your questions in the chat. Okay, guys, welcome back to our live stream here, talking about addiction with Brady Novotny here. Once again, go find him on YouTube so you can watch his videos. He is a musician in addition to being a professional counselor. Brady, where I'm sitting right now, I can't actually see you, but I'm assuming that you can see me. And we did have a few questions that have actually come in our live chat. And we've had about 50 or 70 people who've been here throughout the service listening in and tuning in, which has been really cool. But Josh asked, what if you don't have people that you can tell when you're facing temptation, or what if you can't get a hold of somebody? So what does it look like when you have some of that accountability in place and you can't get a hold of the people? Or what does it look like if you just don't have people that you feel comfortable confessing in, or someone that you can talk to?
So the question is, what do you do when there's nobody to talk to?
Yeah, when you can't get to somebody, yeah.
Well, all depends. I mean, what type of addiction that would be. Once again, you're kind of white knuckling it. You're in the process of white knuckling through some of the, because you're probably, having a trigger, and it's you're fighting it. Once again, learning some of the tricks of how you when the thought enters into the brain, you also you can combat it with that. That's a big thing, but also knowing yourself. They use the word halt. When you're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, or some of your times and I add bored to that as well. Those are times when you have to watch and know yourself, know your situation, know your surroundings. Aside from that, we're looking at, if you can't talk to anybody, there's groups, online all the time. But if you're just by yourself, we have things that we use in therapy, like, journaling and stuff like that. But a lot of people don't like to do that. But you have to somehow suppress that feeling, and I know that's not a good word, suppress that feeling until you can get to talk to somebody.
Mm,
um, that's important. It's like, distraction is key. You can distract yourself until you can get to the morning, or you can distract yourself until you get somebody to talk to, or get in with somebody professionally.
mm. Yeah. One of the questions that just came in is, how do you identify addiction from just a pastime? I usually like to play video games for an hour or two every night. My wife says I'm addicted to video games. I say it's just a hobby, and I'm certainly well within that category as well. So, how do I identify just a pastime versus an addiction?
Great question. That is a great question. We have in marriage counseling, there's a thing called, it's like our spouse identifies what cheating looks like.
Mm,
So when you're in a relationship with somebody, is life in balance? Is there quality time? Or what are her expectations for the relationship? And trying to work through that. Communication is a big one of like, I do like to play video games, or whatever that is. But usually, if it's affecting our quality of life, that's a big indicator. If I'm lying about it, if I'm hiding it, if I'm not communicating it, you know, we're heading down to that selfish, lack of empathy, mode, and that can be a slippery slope. Playing an hour worth of video games, is that an addiction? Doesn't seem like one. Um, but more importantly, would you be spending? Are you? Is there enough time for family?
mm, yeah. Yeah, what does that look like? Sure, in different seasons of life, was it okay in college for me to play several hours of an MMO or World of Warcraft? Yeah, maybe. This seasons of my life, I can. But there have been seasons when we had young kids and I was working in full time ministry that didn't involve the gaming community, where it was out of line, right? That I couldn't do it. And I have found a lot of times for me, if I go to sleep thinking about it and I wake up thinking about it, that it's a good indication that it's out of control. If it's the first thought that's in my brain when I roll out of bed in the morning and I'm like, I got to get back to that game. I know that there's a problem there. JT asked, porn seems to be an epidemic in the age of the internet. And what do you think is the root cause of that issue?
Porn is definitely the silent killer. That's for sure. What is the root cause of that issue? Is that asking? Is that what's wrong with porn?
No,
Or
I think the question is like, why? Why do you think porn has been able to become so rampant and across our entire, I mean, to the point where now we have people who aren't just, who are literally saying that it's not just okay, but it's actually good for you, that they're
hmm,
actually trying to embrace it. I mean, there's certainly passages in the scriptures where we'll talk about the world will get to the point where they'll say what is good is evil and what is evil is good. And I think we kind of see that
right.
within the porn industry, knowing how detrimental it is to marriages, to families, to shame, to all of those various aspects of life, and sort of some of the nefarious industries that porn fuels.
Hmm. Yeah, porn takes away. I mean, the problem with the issue with porn addiction is at the click of a button, I have a turned on individual. Um, for heterosexual people, that's a turned on woman, usually for guys, and that's the that's a loaded question. But
Sure.
I can click a button. There's a turn on woman. I don't have to do anything. I can basically find a category or a genre that this woman, or a similar profile of this woman, will do to satisfy the sexual appetite that I'm having. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, it does nothing. There is no oxytocin released after you masturbate to porn. Uh, it leaves you feeling empty and oftentimes full of shame and guilt, depending upon your relationship status. And it draws you further away from natural interaction. Like I said earlier, it's naturally, pleasurable to have sex with your wife, but porn starts to diminish that because it pulls you away. That's its whole idea, is to pull you away from your wife, and pull you away. That's what I think. Is it healthy at all? No, I think it's evil, and it's completely destructive.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting to know, too, obviously, like, we're church, probably with me leading it, maybe the one willing to wade into stuff like that more than your average Sunday morning congregation. But it's very interesting to hear that there's a chemical that's released in the brain during sexual intercourse that is not released in the brain during masturbation looking at pornography. And so there is an actual difference. And why there's a different feeling and why there's a different result post is because there's an actual literal chemical difference. And it's very interesting to me that the scriptures will even talk about the connection that's made between two people through intercourse and two fleshes becoming one, which is quite literally referring to the chemical that releases, whereas pornography doesn't do that. It's a diversion from that, right? It promises something that it intentionally doesn't deliver. And when we look at scripture and see that Satan is the father of lies, is there a greater lie than to say you're going to get the satisfaction that you want, that you were intended to have through the connection and intimacy of sex? But I'm not going to, once you get to that point, I'm not going to follow through on my end of the bargain, on the commitment that had been made there. You're not going to actually get in the brain what you were created to generate. And I think that's a really interesting concept. And it allows us to maybe, especially those of us who are addicted to porn and maybe even asking, maybe this is a good thing. Because I've been there, right? The brain of an addict will justify anything, right? And so I've been there. And then to look at it that way and say, no, there is quite literally a biological difference here, and I'm being lied to, and I'm being shorted what was intended for me, and that's why the shame and the hurt and the guilt are so oppressive through this addiction.
Yeah, and it's. I guess I can slightly compare it to, it's like if you have a hurt muscle and say in your arm, and you give yourself a massage, it's like, oh, but if somebody gives you a massage, it feels differently. Why is that?
Sure.
It's like, oh, my neck hurts, let me massage my neck. Oh, well, yeah, okay. But when somebody else does it, it's different. You get the feeling of touch from somebody else, but touching yourself doesn't always feel the same.
Absolutely. The last thing I want to address, and we only have we're over on time, but we're always over on time, so that's okay. The last thing I want to ask is just, okay, let's say I have a friend, because not everybody in chat is going to be feeling like I'm dealing with an addiction today and I need help, right? There's going to be some of us are, some of us aren't. So let me ask you this: what if I have a friend who is? What if I have a friend who's actively participating in addiction? I know that they are. How do I help them? What can I do as a friend or a family member to actually help somebody who's in addiction? Because we know that oftentimes friends and family can do harm by enabling the addiction rather than helping to prevent it or helping them deal with the consequences of it. So what does that look like?
Right.
And obviously it's a really high view, right? Every situation is individual. That's why this is so hard a conversation to have, because counseling is an individual thing and we shouldn't be doing it as a giant group. But I think it's a question that a lot of people are asking, like, how do I help my friend or my family member who's an addict?
Well, yeah, I mean, being there for them is one thing, but you can't change anybody. You can't help anybody who doesn't want help. So you have to, if you're going in to that area with somebody, you have to protect yourself. You have to create boundaries. You have to create consequences if they lie to you. If they steal from you, whatever the case may be, one of the cliche lines is, when is an addict lying? And it says always, because it's the addiction that's always talking. The addiction that's talking is manipulative. It's trying to get something. It's not always I don't view it as the person at heart. I view it's the addiction that's attached to them. So you have to be careful because you're going into battle with something that might jump on you, so you have to be careful. But talking to them, do not enable them. If they're like, hey, but can you spare me this money? I got to get out of debt. I got to do this, and then I'll get clean. No, no, I can't do that. But you can be there for them. But you have to set up your own boundaries. It's like, you can't, you can call me, and some people could say you can call me any time of the day or night, but some people have families and be like, call me up to 10 o'clock, but you have to stick to that. They have to find their recovery, and also they have to hit their rock bottom. And that's tough to watch. But being in the field for over a decade, I can't change anybody. I can be there for them, and they come in and out of my life. But it's always up to them to change. So you just have to really protect yourself. Try not to become codependent. But yeah, I mean, we are supposed to be the reaching in like Christ, and trying to help them. So be there, but be wise.
Thank you so much, Brady. Guys, I want to thank you so much, Brady. Thank you. Can I get a couple of fives in chat? Fives are the way that we clap, Brady, because we can't clap in the digital church. We put fives up. We get a couple of fives in chats for Brady. Thank you so much for being willing to join us and being part of this series. We really appreciate it. It's helped us really bring a lot of roots to what I'm talking about the week before. And allowed us, it's a very, very different form of conversation, very, very different than what we've done or what most churches do, but it has been very impactful, I think, to give us the opportunity to step into these conversations. Guys, get help, get help, get help, get help. Please, if you're feeling like you're stuck in an addiction, if you're feeling like you can't get out, get help. Reach out to somebody. Please, please, please do that. Find a counselor. I had Brady's number sitting on my desk for a year before I made the phone call, and I wish I would have made the call a year earlier. I wish I would have made the call many years before that. So thank you so much, Brady, for coming on. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to close out the service here, but thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you, and we'll talk to you really soon. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, church family, that's going to wrap up this episode, this service. Thank you so much for being here. I want to say hello to Crazy Cries. Thank you so much for joining us. I see that you're here for the first time. I saw that someone else was here for the first time as well, and I missed their name, but you were right up there, and I'm so sorry. You just made a comment about not telling people who are having addiction problems that they just need to get help, telling them that over and over and over again. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to every other person who was here for the first time. If you were a first-time guest, and you don't mind taking 2 seconds to let us know what you thought about this and let us know how we can make things better, we would love for that to happen. And so there will be a link in chat. If you hit !guest, or Josh is going to !guest, it'll give you a link to our website, and we're not going to ask for any personal information. All it's going to do is say, how did we do? How could we do better? And you can just let us know with a couple of very quick answers. If you'd like to give to Lux tonight, there are ways to do that. Thank you to every person who donated subs or bits tonight in our hype train at the beginning of the service. We appreciate you, and thank you for supporting the ministry here at Lux Digital Church. But if you would like to give directly to Lux, you can visit our website or grab the link in the chat right now. We're at luxdigitalchurch.com/give. Allows you to set up one-time donations or even weekly or monthly donations to support the church here at Lux, so that we can continue to reach gamers, bring content like this, and bring hope and life to the online gaming community. I want to thank you so much for being here. We love you, church family. Please come hang out with us in Discord tonight. I'm going to be in the Meet Pastor Mark room here in about 5 minutes, so if you want to come and meet me, I'd love to have you stop over the Meet Pastor Mark voice chat room. I'm going to be in there and would love to chat with you tonight. Thank you so much for being here, church family. We love you, and we're so incredibly thankful for you. Come back next week. We'll see you in Discord. Good night, everybody.